welcome to episode 3 of GameDev Building Blocks. Last episode, we finished up our discussion of variables and we talked about how we could type them either implicitly or explicitly. And we've also covered things like declaring your variables as var versus const. We're not done with the variables. There's definitely a lot that we still need to learn about them, but when I think of programming for games, well, I mean, actually, programming in general, doesn't matter really what it's for. I think if I had to kind of pick the two biggest fundamental building blocks, one of them would be variables. And we spent some time talking about those. And the second thing I would say is what's broadly known as functions. Okay, so you've probably heard that word functions if you've been around programming at any point. You also may have heard it in mathematics, at least if you've had some amount of high school mathematics, or maths, as the British like to say. I do like how they say maths. I must say, every time I hear that, it puts a smile on my face. I kind of wish we called it maths in the U.S. Fortunately, we call it mathematics. But anyway, the point is that functions, I think, in order to understand them, I'm going to tell you a story, and then by the end of the story, I think you'll have a better idea of what sorts of the fundamental problem that functions help you solve, right? Okay? So let's say, for example, let's say you're known to be you have this really great chocolate chip cookie recipe, right? You have an amazing chocolate chip cookie recipe. All your friends and family know that, you know what? Andrew, he's got a really great recipe and he always makes super good cookies. Now, typically, when you have a recipe for something, you're basically kind of following a set of instructions step by step, right? And in fact, that's what a lot of times what we're doing in code, right? Is we're kind of giving a set of instructions. Like this is kind of saying like step one, give me a variable that's an integer called epic variable and assign it to 100, right? You know what I mean? Step two, give me a const called uh, legendary variable, and we'll make it 1,000. So these are a lot of times in programming you're basically doing like step by step instructions, right? So if you think about it, that's kind of what you're doing with a recipe typically, right? Is you have kind of these step-by-step instructions that you do. So me, Andrew, with my legendary chocolate chip cookie recipe, maybe a friend might come over and say, hey Andrew, I'm throwing a party next weekend. I'd love to serve your chocolate chip cookies. Can you tell me that recipe? And so me being the giving person that I suppose I have a little bit of a reputation for being, I will say absolutely, get a piece of paper and I'll tell you the instructions step by step. So my friend starts writing them down. Okay, step one, mix the flour, the baking soda. Step two, brown the butter, whatever it is, right? I make pretty good chocolate chip cookies, but not epically good chocolate chip cookies. Don't worry, I'm not holding out on any kind of secret recipe. This is just for example purposes. But let's say my friend writes down all the instructions, and then they go to their house, they make the cookies, they have them at their party. It's a big success. Awesome, right? Okay, next week, now my friend has to give a presentation at work, and he's thinking, you know what? I'm going to grease the palms a little bit here. I'm going to get everyone in a good mood before I give my presentation. I'm going to make those exact same cookies. So now my friend comes up to my house on Monday, and he's like, hey, I've got a presentation to give. I really want to make those chocolate chip cookies. Can you give me the recipe again? And now I'm kind of sitting there a little bit like, okay, yeah, I'm happy to give you the recipe. I mean, I did give it to you last week, but okay, that's fine. All right. Step one, mix in the flour with the baking soda with the salt. Step two, brown the butter. So I give the instructions. Friend goes off, has a great presentation, big success. Everyone loves it. Everyone's got chocolate chips running down their greasy little faces as they're cheering him on. They're in a great mood from the delicious cookies. They're delirious. They're delirious from the cookies. And it's a great success. And my friend ends up getting the promotion. So then my friend shows up on Friday and he's like, hey, Andrew, I hate to bother you again, but I've got a date coming up this weekend, and I just really want to bake those chocolate chip cookies. I think they could really go over well. At this point, I'm getting a little bit frustrated because this is the third time that I've given this friend the exact same instructions. So I say, hey, what's going on here? Uh, don't you think it's a little odd that I keep having to give you the same instructions? Maybe you should, write these down. And my friend goes, oh, I'm sorry, you never told me that those were instructions that I should have remembered. Okay? And I know it's a little bit of a silly story, but the point of the story is that what I just described, a set of instructions that you kind of write down so that you can repeat later, that's basically what a function accomplishes in a nutshell, right? It's a way to it accomplishes a couple things. One, it encapsulates a set of instructions that you might want to repeat several times in your game. So, for example, you can imagine in the scenario where you're making a game, there's maybe certain steps of instructions that you might want to repeat over and over and over again, right? And so by putting those set of instructions inside of a function, then what you're able to do is easily recall that set of instruction, that set of you're able to easily recall that set of instructions by doing what in programming language, and by programming language I mean like programming jargon. What we in programming jargon say, call a function, right? So you might hear that programmers talking, hey, I'm going to call this function, right? Or maybe it's time to where's that function being called, right? And all that is basically saying is, you know, run that set of instructions, right? So that's kind of the basics. So let's quickly write a function together so that we can kind of learn how to do that sort of thing. And really quickly, I'll get rid of these things. We'll just do this. We'll do const name of character. I just want to so maybe like this is the barbarian. Um, and then we'll have some variables like, for example, health, and maybe we'll start with like 100. Maybe strength will be like 12. Oops, strength. Maybe dexterity will be 10. Var intelligence will be 4. Var wisdom will be 8. And then we'll do charisma will be like 11 or something like that. So, typical kind of RPG type stats, right? So, going back to that idea of like the cookie recipe, let's say that a recipe for leveling up um, is something like we'll increase the health by 5, the strength by 2, and then we'll just do everything else by 1, for example. So this is kind of like me typing out the instructions. Now don't be confused by the fact that this is a function here. Remember, I'm using the ready callback to run code because it's kind of hard to just like run code. Like I can't really do something like this where I just like do something um, unexpected identifier. So that's just kind of like a little bit of a quirk of kind of working, within a game engine, right? Because a game engine is essentially it's kind of like an infinite loop, So I'm just using the ready callback, as I've stated in other videos. I'm just using the ready callback to kind of like run some code, right? So for example, let's say this is our character, right? And I guess just to kind of show that this is working, I'm going to print our health value. And if we run this here, we can see that yes, we did level up. We have 105 health. Okay. But again, this is like me, because then let's say the next time I level up. So for example, this will be like first. first level up, right? So then maybe the second level up, we have to do all this again, right? And anytime you find yourself like copy and pasting like the same instructions over and over again, that's usually a sign that like something's wrong. Like you could be doing it a lot more strategically. So for example, if I do like let's see, so this is barbarian's health after first level up, and then we'll just do this, and we learned from previous video that we want to go ahead and wrap that in str to make sure that it knows that I want a string. And then down here, after the second level up, we will also print the health. So just to kind of show how this is working, you can see down here that nothing got printed, and I'm not exactly sure why. Oh, I know why, because I ran the wrong scene. So Barbarian's health after first level up is 105. Barbarian's health after second level up is 110. I hope you guys can see that okay. I apologize that text might be a little small. I do apologize for that. But again, it's this same recipe. It's this same kooky instruction, right? So let's be a little smarter about this. So let's create a function. So the first thing we need to do when we want to create a function is we need to tell GDScript that, hey, we're about to create a function. So we use func for that, F-U-N-C, okay? Then you give your function a name. So for example, I'll name it level up, okay? And typically the convention is to use this, I think it's called snake case, where you have like lower case and then you have like an underscore for spaces. So typically, if you're following along with any of my videos, or for that matter, most videos that are kind of part of the Godot community, I'll kind of teach you guys kind of the syntax that you'll typically tend to see, because that way it'll be easier for you to kind of follow other people's code and stuff. So the next thing we need to do is we need to put an open parentheses and then a closed parentheses, okay? And what that's going to do is that's basically going to finish completing our name of our function, okay? And then, so that's like saying like, this is a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, you know what I mean? So basically what we're saying here is this is a recipe for leveling up. And where do we put the instructions? So we put a colon, and then if you hit enter, you will have the ability to write your instructions step by step. So basically these instructions here are what I want. So what are the instructions? What do you do step by step when you level up? You increase the health by 5, the strength by 2, and so on, right? So now, check this out. When I want to level up, all I have to do is call that function. Sorry, excuse me. I have a little bit of a speech impediment, and it trips me up sometimes. I do apologize. So what do I do when I want to follow these, basically execute these instructions? What do I want to do if I want to execute these instructions? All I do is call my function, and the way you call the function is you just type the name of the function and then open and close parentheses. This is basically saying, hey, I want to call that level up function, right? So when you're creating your recipe, your function for the first time, you have to use the func keyword. But when you want to call your function, you don't need to do that, right? So here, I've leveled up once, and then I'll level up again. And actually, we can make this even more efficient. We can say, we can basically have this print out for us. So after the level up, and then, so what we could do is we could add another variable. Let's say, for example, var, level, to keep track of the player. We'll start him at level. We'll start the barbarian at level 1, and then the first thing we'll do is we'll level increase 1 as well, so we can keep track of the level of our character. And now we'll say barbarian's health after, and then what we'll do is we'll say we will say, uh, how do I want to do this? Um, so we'll say barbarian's health after, and then we'll do plus str level, and then concatenate another string, um, and then we'll actually print the health like that. So that should work. But notice what's cool about this is instead of having to like retype these instructions each time, it's now kind of encapsulated in the recipe. It's saying, hey, go ahead and print the health, let them know what level they're at, and then give them the value of the health, right? So I can get rid of this here. So I don't need this anymore. And I'll leave the comment so you can see. But basically we're gonna do one level up, and then we're gonna do a second level up. So let's see what happens. I keep doing the wrong script. This one. Okay, Barbarian's health after 2 levels, 105. Perfect. Remember they started at 100, so they leveled up once. Now they're at level 2. Barbarian's health after 3 levels, 110. Beautiful. And the cool thing is, look how much more simple this is. I want to level up a third time. You know, easy. All I have to do is call that function that I made, right? So functions are really important, right? They're all over the place. They're used all over the place. And the other thing that's really cool about them is when you're working like on a team, for example, let's say I'm working with my twin brother Eric, and he's working with the barbarian class, and he's saying, "Hey, Andrew, I created this this item in the game, and it's going to be like a consumable item. And when the player chooses to consume it, it's like a rare candy in Pokemon. It'll level them up." Well, the cool thing is I can just say, "Hey, yeah, great, go ahead. You can, the barbarian has a level up function. You can call that, you know." So Eric, who's maybe working somewhere else in the code, he can call level up, and he doesn't need to know the nitty gritty of like everything that it does, right? He can kind of trust that like me, Andrew, that I've implemented that function correctly. And so now this gives, you know, you and your teammates a whole nother kind of level of tools to work with to kind of uh, to make your code more reusable and to kind of pass your code around your team, okay? So that's the very, very basics as far as functions, how to create them. So one thing that you could do if you're kind of following along and practicing is think of something that in your game that you're designing that is something that gets repeated a lot, and try to think about how you could encapsulate that idea into a function so that you could, you know, call that set of instructions whenever you want at the drop of a hat, right? Okay. So the last thing we'll do is we'll take a look at an example of a function in our code base and see how it's helping us achieve our game. All right, so I found an example where I can show how we use functions to kind of help us in development. So this is our survival horror game here, which is the one that's kind of in the most active development. So you'll see a lot of clips from this game if you follow my devlog series. But here we have the item manager script. Let me simplify this down so it's a little easier, so you can just kind of focus on one thing at a time. So here's the item manager script, and you know, it has a lot of maybe it seems like a lot of lines of code, but it's not that bad. But I just want to focus on this idea here. So this is actually very similar to what we just saw. Now, one thing is this part here, I didn't do that in my example of my function. We'll talk about that. The next video we'll talk about basically we're gonna have a few videos on functions because there's kind of several things that I want to talk about with them. But for now, I guess I'll just say that what this is doing is it's basically, you know, if you remember our discussion about static types versus dynamic types, I'm basically telling Godot like, hey, this function is gonna return nothing, Okay, so that's what, because functions can return values, and we'll talk about that later. But just so you're not confused, this is basically just a way of telling Godot like, hey, this is a function that doesn't return anything. Okay, similar to our level up function. Our level up function, it didn't return anything. It just went through and it basically leveled up the character stats, right? And it printed out the health when it was done. So this is a function, and notice that I've named it handle flashlight attempt. And so basically what this does is it's an example of these are the steps that I want to happen in the game when the player tries to use the flashlight. Okay. And basically what I do is step one, I get the on-off status, and that is inside of a dictionary, which we'll talk about. We'll talk about all these things, but that's like step one of the recipe. Step two, you know, if current on-off status, then we basically do some stuff, right? We request a sound effect, just step by steps, right? These are the steps that I want to have happen every time the player tries to use their flashlight. And so the great thing is that this is a nice little set of instructions that anytime a player in my game wants to use the flashlight, I'm basically calling this same recipe here, right? So if we fire up the game here, and we'll just do a one-player game, I'm going to grab some items here. So here's the flashlight, right? So it's really simple, but the flashlight's in my hand, and in the game, right-click is how you use an item. So just that's me attempting to use the item, right? So every time I do this, I'm basically calling that function. I can actually show this. So here at the beginning, I'll just say print I am using the handle flashlight recipe. Okay, so just to show, what's happening, right? And we could see where we're calling this actually. That might be kind of interesting to see. So one thing you can do is when your code base gets a little bit larger, you can do search and then you can do find in files. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find where we're calling this. So, okay, so we're doing it here. Okay, so this is part of a more generic function that attempts to use an item, and then basically depending on which one you're trying to use, we're calling this specific function. But remember, just like our level up function, this is that same syntax we're using, right? So this is where we're actually calling the function, and then here is where we're defining the function. So again, if we look at the output here, and I'll do a one-player game here, and I'm just going to try to grab the flashlight. It's hard because all the items are spawning on top of each other right now. But notice, so see right here where it says, here, let me give you a good look at that. So watch the output right here, okay? So I'm going to right-click. See? I'm using the handle flashlight recipe, right? So that's me calling that same function over and over again. I'm basically baking those same chocolate chip cookies every time I'm right-clicking, okay? And, you'll find that, this will be all over your game, right? Your game's going to have tons of things where every time the player... Oh, the ghost is trying to chase me. Every time the player... Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of repetition in your gameplay loop if you think about it, right? There's probably like a lot of things that you do over and over and over and over and over and over again. And by encapsulating those things into functions, you'll just have a very, very clean code base, and a code base that's much easier to work with. Okay? So I hope that I'm going to get rid of that before my brothers wonder why why I added a cooking crafting system to our survival horror game. That's actually not a bad idea, but that's an idea for the devlog series, not the GameDev Building Blocks series. So that will, I think, do it for our episode 3 here. I hope you enjoyed it, and like I said, I know these videos are a little basic, but my goal is to really try to start from the very, very, very basics so that everyone can kind of catch up and feel confident about starting to program their own games. and we'll kind of learn together, and we'll get into kind of more and more complex things as the series goes on. Okay. But I hope that seeing these ideas that I'm presenting, seeing them in the context of an actual game's code base, I hope that that's helpful for you, because that's really kind of the main thing about this series that I'm trying to do to kind of differentiate my series from maybe other series. I mean, there's definitely other series who do that sort of thing, but that's kind of what I'm focusing on, right? Is introducing the concept, talking about it, and then showing how we use it to solve our problems that we run into on a day-to-day basis. Okay? So anyway, I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you in the next episode. See you next Monday. Take care.